So last year's unrest put the country's public order policing in the spotlight. The army was called in to assist police bring crowds under control, mainly in KwaZulu-Natal as well as in Gauteng. Speaking of the South African Human Rights Commission's inquiry into the violence, the Institute for Security Studies said that the use of rubber bullets was largely ineffective. Many fear that the country could see similar scenes in years to come, especially now that more people are unemployed and battling to make ends meet. For a discussion on this, I'm joined by the ISS's Jakkie, Cilliers. Ms. Cilliers, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time and your patience as we dealt with that developing news out of KwaZulu-Natal. A year on, we've had a briefing just on Friday by the government, the ministers from the Justice and Crime Prevention Cluster, outlining progress that's been made in addressing some of the flaws picked up in the unrest last year. Have they managed to plug all the holes, do you think?
I think very clearly the government is trying, but the damage that has been done over several years to the entire criminal justice system and the underfunding and lack of attention to defense means that it will take a while. Government have appointed senior officials in permanent positions, particularly the National Commissioner. They're trying to clean up what's been happening in the State Security Agency, but it will take time. Many of the problems that we relate to have built up over a decade or more. For example, the lack of focus on detectives, the collapse of intelligence, the focus increasingly today on visible policing and not on understanding the crime trends. These are all issues that predate the July riots. So when we listen to the pronouncements, there's a lot of focus on, bringing more legislation, for example, on firearms or to control alcohol. The problem is not really the legislation or the policy. The problem is almost entirely in the application and the competence to apply and implement and hold people to account. And that's really where the problems lie. They don't really lie, I think, in the frameworks, the policy frameworks that the country have.
Let's talk about that then, because one of the other things that the cabinet ministers have said in their briefing is that for the first time since the pandemic, which had disrupted training of police officers, excuse me, they'll now be training for about 10,000. But are they being given the right sort of training to respond to the security situation post-July 2021?
So when violence breaks out, we bring the public order policing, we bring the military to try and clamp down on the violence and on the situation. But in the normal run-of-the-mill process, what we should be doing is having detectives that quietly are making sure that cases are being prepared, that eventually can end up and be successfully prosecuted. That is how you build the rule of law. But we are constantly on the back foot, that we have to try and respond to the violence, as I said, through measures like public order policing. That is not a response. That doesn't effectively deal with the challenges. And above all of that, we have the lack of consequence management right from the top. If we look, for example, at the recommendations from the Zondo Commission, which pointed the fingers at a number of serving deputy ministers and senior officials in government, some of them ambassadors in places like China. Until government is not being seen to act and hold people that have clearly contributed to the dire situation that we find ourselves, it's very difficult to then expect that somehow the police must act any way different to what is happening at the national level. Let's make the point that government is trying. I mean, it's very clear from the briefing that you were referring to.
But let me then go to another development today. Police Minister Cilliers in Soweto, Orlando East, where 15 people were killed in a tavern. No one is able to tell us at this stage in the 24 hours since why these people were killed, by whom, and where the attackers might have gone, right? But what the police minister has now promised is the deployment of the tactical response team to Orlando East. Now, psychologically, the presence of police officers can be reassuring to residents, but is it the appropriate response?
At the dealing with a crisis, of course, the minister does what he tries. He's trying his best. And the only response they have is more visible policing and putting members in uniform out there. but that is, a bandage on the problem. We have a Minister of Police who is constantly in the news and going from the one crisis to the next. The problem with the police is a basic management problem. It is the fact that we have a bloated top structure of police, lots of money going to VIP protection, underinvestment in detectives and in the real instruments through which we can deal with organized crime and try and prevent the kind of organized criminal activity that we saw in the tavern shootings. It's these basics, the management of it's police culture, it is police management that needs to be changed. Mm-hmm. Now we have a permanent national commissioner for the first time, and he really needs to be able to get behind the restructuring and reorientation of a police that faces problems that come from the days of the appointment of Jakkie as National Commissioner, and the problems that have been built up since then in the constant restructuring and the one strategy on top of the other, instead of really, in a sense, going back to basics in fixing the challenges.
Just on the taverns, I mean, yesterday we were dealing with at least 3 shootings, one in Katlehong where 2 people were killed. Also in Gauteng, these 15 people were massacred in a tavern in Soweto. In KZN, 4 people killed under similar circumstances in Pietermaritzburg. That's 3 shootings, mass shootings, at taverns in one weekend. Is it random? Is it all a coincidence?
None of us know. And the police, because the forensics department is not working, and because the firearms control unit is not working, and because we don't have effective crime investigation services or crime intelligence, none of us know. We can only speculate until such time as we have information. But so you have firearms that are flooding South Africa, but we know that the majority of those firearms in actual fact come from the police because they are smuggled out from the firearms control units and sold on the black market because our firearms control system doesn't work. It's got nothing to do with legislation or policy. Everything has to do with management and control and holding people to account. Mm. And these are the issues that we need to fix. Legislation on firearms is not the problem. Alcohol legislation is not the problem. It is implementing the legislation, and that is really the problem. Giving effect to the fantastic laws that we have in this country. And that requires a technical, a management, a competent response to the challenges that the country faces.
Right.
It doesn't require lots of politics.
You said, Jakkie, that it's not about policy necessarily. On Friday, then, at that briefing by the Justice Crime Prevention Ministers, there was a question about the lack of a complete, comprehensive national security strategy plan. And the Minister, Mondli Gungubele, responded saying, well, it's a work in progress as things stand. How much would it help us prevent what happened in July last year and taverns, the attacks on taverns which we've seen this week where more than one person is being killed and no one is actually able to explain why or by whom?
It will make some difference. We could get rid of, for example, the orientation away from back towards sort of a broader approach of human developmental security as opposed to the state security approach that we have within state security, the State Security Agency, because there everything is a secret. So yes, certain policy directions are important, but we've had this before. What we need implementation. We need management. We need to hold people to account. We need to implement what we say we are going to do. So yes, it's important to have a national strategy. I personally don't think that will make a large difference to the situation that calls for back to basics. It calls for effective implementation of management of the rules and the regulations and the policies that we have.
Jakkie, Cilliers, good to have your time as always. Jackie's with the Institute for Security Studies. And speaking of mass shootings,